The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Hawaiian Volcano Tracker update, and Samoa today. We'll wrap up Samoa today as well. So we got quite a lot to cover today. Thanks for joining us and bearing with us. I try to give you guys a little summary here at the start. We're going to start off with Mauna Loa and the following up on a recent earthquake swarm and the continued elevated rates. The rates are still higher than the previous background, but they're down from the high we had at the end of last month. So we'll look at that. We'll look at the historical patterns. We'll look at what's likely, what's the worst case, whenever the next eruption actually comes, with still no imminent sign and ramp up of an activity visible yet. So perhaps it won't even come. So we'll look at that. We'll then catch up on Kilauea, which we've skipped for a couple of weeks because of Mauna Loa here. And Kilauea is still filling from below, just like the lava injecting beneath that crater and lifting it up, and the active lava lake still circulating. So we'll review that. We'll talk about some of the challenges that poses on our calculation of eruption rates and volumes and those things, and look at what how much was actually injected in intrusion. And then we'll wrap up some more, like I said before, with just all the summary data the USGS has put out in the last few weeks here. So, Dane, do you have anything you want to share here off the top? Oh, I can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, it's just always interesting to sit down and try and quantify exactly based on the historical record, which is again the best we have, really. I mean, there's errors in it, there's issues with it, but again, it's the best we got. So trying to use that to put things in the ballpark in terms of expectations for people, right? Because just because it's the eruption that's would be most likely to impact you does not mean that's the most likely thing to happen, if that makes sense. So yeah, we'll go through a bunch of stuff on that, and of course go through the latest on Kilauea, although that doesn't look as much as changed right now.
No, good to catch up though. We miss her, so
yeah.
we'll do that. Yeah, and one thing I wrote in our article I really sorted today was it's definitely wise to plan and prepare for the worst case, but perhaps it's not what we should expect at this point in time, right? So preparedness is always what we're advocating for. That's our ultimate goal here. So please, don't discount it. Take a chance to plan and prepare, but we'll try to put things in perspective, as far as what actually to expect, right? And of course, we never actually know. So since we have so much to get through, I'll get us going here, Dane. Start off with our Hawaiian volcano summary. Just this is an image that Dane pulled from the Mauna Loa camera this morning, showing sunrise there in the east, and you see some haze and some of these gas vents that are visible here on the floor of Mokuaweoweo crater, right? The summit caldera of Mauna Loa right there. So that's pretty cool. Just want to start off with that, but let's show you guys a quick version of what's happening on Kilauea here. And my computer has been a little slow today, so we may have to transition here. There. Yeah, hopefully it's coming. All right, so this is it's stuck here, Dan. Let me fix it real quick. What I'm trying to show you guys here is an image that Dan put together from the B1 camera that's showing the rise in the crater floor here since that drop down occurred on a volcano. So let's get that going properly. All right, there it is. So that's what's been happening on Kilauea. That's a summary for Kilauea. This is going back the last 3.5 weeks or so. You can see the crater floor starting to rise. It drops a bit, and then you see it resume rising ever since. So that's really the summary time lapse from the B1 camera there that Dane pulled out, just the daytime images here to give us that view. Interesting how it pops up right before it actually drops back down. Pops up here on the far edge, drops back down, and then it's been refilling. But maybe just from this you can see it's not refilled quite as much as it dropped out 3 weeks ago or so. So that's the quick version for Kilauea. For Mauna Loa, this is the quick version. Here is the graph for earthquake rates for the past month. You can see that earlier in the month we were down in a 10 to 20 earthquakes per day range down in here. And we ramped up by the last third of September there. And there were 3 days, that's the 23rd, the 29th, and the 30th, that were either over or close to 100 earthquakes per day. Those three right there, and you see kind of ramp down over here. And actually, since then, we've remained at elevated rates at this averaging 50, but really ranging from somewhere like 35 to 65, somewhere in there, within this little window right in here. That's been the kind of new background ever since that intrusion activity began, right? Calling it that as magma is filling the inside of the volcano there, even if it is just in the reservoir area. So we basically have this new background. That's what we're dealing with compared to the old background down over here, and that's the real change. And we have a few intermittent clusters of earthquakes that are swarming in there, right? So one of the key things I took away from all the talks over the years from USGS is that what you're looking for is activity to be more continuous and less intermittent. So we've seen intermittent activity in episodes of this happening several times in the past over several years. So we'll go into details of that. I'll pull out some of the examples of that if you care to stick around for all of that. But to kind of summarize and brief what's happening in Mauna Loa, here's a time lapse from that summit camera in Mauna Loa, showing moonrise, sunrise, and all in all quiet over the past week up there at the summit of Mauna Loa. So all these changes are happening underground. There's nothing visible at the surface. No extra anything that has been detected or reported by the USGS. So that's the short and sweet there of what we're going to go through. And let me switch it over here to our Mauna Loa report, which will be what we take on first here. So from that time-lapse and time-lapse sequence, we can pull out some of these other images, and here's one that I got from this morning, and we'll check this out. But we've heard reports, people talking about there's steam up there and different gas coming out, and that's something that's not visible all the time, because during the daytime the area is very exposed and gets a lot of that solar radiation, so the air ends up being really dry up there and warm in some areas. But first thing in the morning, right after the sun comes up, like this nice picture is taken here, you get that cold air and you see some of that gas and steam strewn across the crater floor there and against the back wall over there. And so we'll try to collect some of these and share in the future, but just to show you guys that that's actually a normal occurrence, depending on the weather conditions at the summit more so than anything else. And I'm just showing a summit image. There are other images from other parts of the volcano that also have gas vents, but just to put that out there as such. And for confirmation of that, there is a summit thermal camera on Mauna Loa as well, and here it is. And I just pulled out one frame that wasn't totally blown out because it seems to be having a few issues with the scaling because there's really no lava to look at. So our scale here on the right is going from about 0 to 50 degrees Celsius, and there's 50 right there, and 0 down here. So really nothing is hotter than 50, and it's really just the sun shining in these closest rocks over here, and you don't really see any zone of heat anywhere by these cracks or anything down here on the floor of the crater. So just regular, normal, not that hot, just what's been going on for decades since the last eruptions on the summit of Mauna Loa there. Okay, so moving on to earthquake rates on Mauna Loa. We talked about this 1 month view of earthquake rates here in our summary. If we zoom out from there and look at the last year, here is our view. It'll come up on the screen. Yep, there it is. There's the last year. So clearly here on the right side is our recent plot, and clearly much higher than the earthquakes per week background reported here of about 100 for most of the last year. So definitely interesting. You can see why so much discussion and some concern and thirst for information here. So putting it back to the last 5 years, here's our most recent peak at the right. You can see we got up to over 1,000 earthquakes in 1 month. That's the new scale here on the left, earthquakes per month, crossing 1,000. And that actually does exceed this cluster of 3 months where we were at close to 700, 800 earthquakes each of those 3 months in a row. And so maybe in total, if you take those 700 by 3 and you add this 1,000 to these couple of 500s over here, it's getting somewhere in a similar ballpark of the same total amounts. But there's more to it. We'll dig into it more than that as we roll along here. But you can see that we're actually, the way it binned out with these different months, we ended up having a higher peak here in a more recent event. And you can see all of this, since we're looking back 5 years, follows that 2018 period where it was really quite quiet there, right? So it's really come up, and it's been having this intermittent activity for a while. peaking in 2001, and then got relatively quieter before ramping back up now to these more intermittent levels once again. So that's the larger context. Looking at the map for the last week, here's how it looks. I'm going to switch it over to this tab here. And maybe that's not going to work as well. But in any case, what you can see is the distribution of these events, which, by the way, if I haven't mentioned before, these are plotted colored by depth, right? So red is shallower and orange is intermediate, yellow and green being deeper still, right? So there's kind of one deeper over here. Intermediates usually pop off here on this northwest area of the area northwest of the summit. Some here to the southeast as well, but mostly we're seeing shallow earthquakes underneath the summit and this upper southwest rift, which is a typical area we've typically seen them there, and also some here in the northwest area. So that's the last week only. Compare that to the last month, where it's the same areas but a lot more earthquakes, really. So that is consistent with what we just saw, that the bulk of the earthquakes have occurred already, and while they're still continuing now, the larger amount occurred earlier in the month and not within the last week here. But still no same areas, and we can look at that in more ways than just this. But first, I thought I'd pull out one of our comments from last week from Flying Turtle. It says, "Hey Phil and Dame, awesome job as usual, but at about 8 p.m., a couple minutes after you guys signed off, there was a seismic activity that affected the seismographs all over the island. The largest reading was an event related to Mauna Loa summit of 2.9 magnitude. Interesting." So mahalo for that comment, Flying Turtle. Hope you get to see this. And I did pull out that seismogram from that moment, and that's what he or she is referring to right here, is that long signal there, right? So that happened right after we got off, and it does look like, let's see if I can zoom it in a little bit here. Getting a lot of spinning wheel today there. So you see that tremor band picks up, it runs maybe not quite all the way through 15 minutes or so, and maybe partway through it seems to activate this other earthquake, right? So it leads to this small event, and maybe that's a 2.9 right in there. But didn't last, wasn't very persistent, so interesting to note that, and likely there are other such instances on the record. I won't go through and pick out any more of them, but you can see that what we're looking for is essentially a continuous tremor to be one of the most imminent signals of magma moving towards the surface, right? For some indication, you're looking at possibly less than an hour from seeing continuous tremor to lava breaking out of the ground. But we're not seeing that here. We're just seeing a couple bursts, which means magma is moving underground, but from here to there and then stopping, and then here to there and stopping, and here to there. And so it's just kind of filling and pushing and working its way into the surrounding structure of the mountain there, wherever it can find a little crack. And that's how it's building. And unless it has a continuous tremor, we're not going to be thinking it's headed for imminent eruption there. So that was a plot from last week. Let me iterate to what is current now. So here's a plot from the last 48 hours from whenever this last loaded, which is recently here. Not letting me scroll. There we go. So we have some of these small earthquake events popping up as these darker splotches of ink here. And then you still get these occasional bands of what appears to be tremor, right? But one tricky thing is this can also be wind or aircraft, and so you really would like a better spectrographic signal or something to correlate this, right? So I'm not going to that level of detail here, just pointing out the general overall pattern, and the next level would be to go to the spectrographs there, see the frequency that these are coming through on. So still nothing really super alarming apart from this certainly visible elevated activity here on the record. All right, the most recent update from USGS, which is a source of much of this information here, along with some of the published research we'll mention. Today, we're still at advisory yellow, aviation code yellow, alert level advisory, and Mauna Loa is not erupting, and there are no signs of imminent eruption at this time. However, heightened state by increased activity and inflation at the summit. The current arrest is most likely being driven by renewed input of magma 2 to 5 miles beneath Mauna Loa's summit. Modern data show no significant changes in the past day, and conditions remain similar to those reported for the past week. So that is the most recent update there, and the narrative is quite good here. But before we get to that, it should be noted that over the last day, our number was 53 earthquakes. Most of those in that similar range. GPS instruments at the summit and on the flanks continue to measure inflation at rates elevated since mid-September. However, tilt meters at the summit are not showing significant surface deformation over the past week. So that's an interesting note there, right? And down here in the narrative, they'll note that the deeper magma input greater than 2 miles is detected by the increase in upward movement on GPS. And then the lack of tilt signal leads them to believe that shallower magma input of less than 2 miles was likely responsible for inflation that occurred late September, but is no longer ongoing at present, right? Doesn't mean it can't start again, but it's not, hasn't been going. We'll look at the tilt meter here shortly to look at that as well. So finally, just to highlight this last sentence here, the current increase in activity does not suggest a progression to an eruption is certain, and there are no indications that an eruption is imminent. And updates are still being put out daily, and you can follow us for the summary versions or go and read each of those every day if you like as well. So that's the Mauna Loa source there, and I thought I'd do a little more. So going to the USGS main page, there's a way that if you look at that map at the top of the page and click things in a certain right order, right? The way I do it is I'll first zoom into the map so I can see all these different monitoring instrument icons. And then I'll go up to the settings and I'll click show earthquake data. And then I go up to the earthquake data and I'll pick how long the earthquake data actually went, whether it's 2 days or 2 weeks or a full month, and plot those. And so here's an example of that. These are plotted by time. So in this case, red is the last 2 hours, orange is the last 2 days, yellow is the last 2 weeks, and white is within the last month or so. And after you do that, you can click on that earthquake plots, and you can click 2 points, have clicked A and B here, and make a little box that catches all those earthquakes and have it plot for you some of the data, right? So it doesn't quite show on the website very easily, but if you're crafty, you can pull these images out. So here is a cross section from A to B, right, showing the whole last month of earthquakes, and you can see it's showing a fairly narrow zone that spans all these depths, right? Imagine this is somewhat like the conduit coming up into the shallow part of the volcano here, right? There is sea level at 0, and 2.5 miles is how tall Mauna Loa's surface is at the summit, which is at the very, very top up here, right? So these earthquakes are very close to the surface at the top here, but most of the clusters of them are happening in this zone that's kind of just below sea level to halfway up the mountain, right? That's where it's kind of feeding in and kind of gathering in there, right? So since this is a bit crowded and mostly white from most of the last month, I thought I would plot just the last 2 weeks here. So here's just the last 2 weeks, and you can see that the yellow is essentially the later phases of that earthquake swarm, and you can see the few oranges and reds here where the events are still happening. So it's all happening still in the same area. It's not like these are moving in location anywhere, right? They're not obviously rising, but clearly this is a magma body here that has boundaries and it's being pushed, and it's likely going to be on the edges, right? And this is 3D; it's all flattened, so really anywhere in that cloud can be the edges of that structure, and where you'd expect earthquakes to occur. So that's the cross section of that recent activity. This is a different way of looking at the earthquake rates, right? So this is just pure counts on the left here, and then time on the right here. In this case, the last month as well. So what you can see at the very bottom here is but maybe if I zoom it in some more, if I dare try to manipulate the computer here. There it is. So you can see it was rising fairly flat. This is a background rate. Then it starts climbing a little bit faster. This was a few weeks ahead of that intrusion and earthquake swarm, and that's what this is, the first post right here. When it gets really that steep, going almost vertical, that's your earthquake swarm. As you can see, went quite fast. Slow down a little bit. Slow down a little bit more, and then it got fast again, right? That's the post of the 23rd of September, and then that 29th and 30th of September back over here. And then after that, I'll zoom it out. After that, it slows down a bit more, and maybe speeds up slightly more. And so we're still in this elevated climbing rate here. Well, let's see if I can get the top of this to show. Still at this elevated climbing rate here, but it hasn't gone vertical yet. And if it does that, then you'll know we're having more pulses of magma, and that would be signs of buildup, right? Of less intermittent and more consistent if they can keep that up and do it more often, more frequently. That's a transition that would be more convincing towards an eruption. So there is that plot. And here is the other version that we have often shown before. And let's see if I can get both the bottom and the top on the screen at the same time here. But this is depth versus time. So you see depth on the left here and times on the bottom. And oh, no, that didn't do it. There we go. So time on the bottom here. This is the whole last month. So that's why all the white ones are in that first half of the month. All the yellow ones are in this last 2 weeks here, and then just orange and right over here. So this is just showing the depth, right? So there's that conduit zone. You see the conduit was active a little bit in those first 2 weeks, but it really became much more active in that late September zone right in there. And really that first pulse especially, and then a little bit in the later pulses there. Whereas that upper cloud was already filling and quaking before that extra injection from below, right, on time over here. So that's interesting to see that there. And basically it's this same zone that's still active, and you see it getting a little bit higher in here, but it's not quite as high as it's gotten. And really you don't see what you could see is just like you see this rise coming vertical here. If you were to see that coming towards the surface, that's what would indicate an eruption, right? But we're not seeing that quite yet. It seems to be staying within this kind of envelope cloud right over here. And of course, we'll just have to wait and see what she actually does. You know, this is all just trying to make sense of the patterns and explain and use our observation here to try to understand this force of nature that's above us here. So zooming into the last 2 weeks, just for a little more clarity as well, there's that initial pulse and a little bit of those later stages. But really that cloud happening right in here, right? You see the shallowest events happened during that second pulse, late September there, early October. And now we're still more or less, maybe slightly rising here, but you know, it's a similar shaped cloud, I would say, right there and there for that zone of neutral buoyancy we've seen it called before, right? Where the magma can go up and it has enough weight above it to kind of keep it in, but it's risen enough to have become you know, more neutrally buoyant, essentially. So, all right. One last thing on the depths. Here is a whole last year Mauna Loa. This is that larger plot that's showing a much greater depth. So we're in kilometers now, but we're going all the way down to 70. So this is way down. We've been looking at just this upper part right in here. Not even that, like probably right in there. So I just wanted to point out here that prior to this recent activity here in early September, we are seeing some of these deeper blue zone earthquakes occurring, maybe slightly elevated rates down there, that maybe the magma was moving from deeper areas into the volcano, and then eventually here in a more recent time came into the shallower zones, and that's what we're seeing now. So really the reason this is all happening is because of more magma coming in from below the volcano. It's been doing that for a while. We'll talk about that here. But that's the ultimate cause is that, right? And thus far, the volcano has been able to spread and accommodate and be able to do that without erupting since 1984, despite being filling with magma really at a pretty continuous rate since 2014 until now. And before that, there was a pulse in 2002 to 2005, and before that, it was more sitting there following that eruption, just waiting to fill and spread, right? So has been filling and spreading already. So looking at monitoring signals, here is the last week of tilt, and these up and down wiggles are the normal variations you see day to day, and you have to ignore all that, and you know, maybe there's a slight downward trend there, but it's hard to really be convinced. Looking at the whole last month, there's that same signal there, and maybe it's slightly downward there. But that follows that earlier rise that you see right in there that started about the 23rd. And then you see the tilt signal moving upwards. That's that inflation. That's a signal of magma coming into that upper 2 miles of the volcano there. And then that seems to have ceased at the beginning of October there, and it's been stable and steady in that uppermost area since then, right? And obviously the deeper area that you're still seeing those earthquakes and you're still seeing the GPS signals here, GPS signals. That's where the magma is still filling from below, and it might lead to more shallow activity, but that's the general pattern that's being seen at present. So GPS at the summit, this is the distance north to south across the summit. We're not really getting the most recent data here at the right, but what you can see is that high rate of spreading that we saw seems to be a little less resolved here at the far right end, right? So it seems like it's maybe stabilized a little as well, but hard to tell from that. What you can see from the up signal, right, is that the upward trend is still going, and it doesn't seem to have been disrupted or changed in any way whatsoever. Right? So you can see that it's still being pushed from below, and that's that good sign of injection from below that you see USGS mentioning. So the 5-year GPS, there is our current signal on the 5-year GPS here at the right end, right in there. Right, kind of that little dip and rise, and obviously there's this huge one that occurred back in spring 2021. But if you go beyond that, you can see that there in late 2020, there also were more of these little dips that occurred there and there too. And so we'll see if we'll have a pattern of more dips occurring, where essentially what I conceive of is you see the flanks spreading and then magma coming back in to fill that area that's now has less pressure. It comes and fills it and repressurizes it, and it leads to that upwards distribution and progression and cracking and filling, and then it goes back and resumes its regular trend, right? So it's that kind of adjustment happening that could lead to an eruption, but is not showing that quite yet there. And just to show you guys how many times this happened before, just in the last 5 years here, just since 2018, without causing an eruption. So, however, there is the up signal, and you can see that up signal also clearly visible there. All right, so there are some other interesting things we can point out. Looking on the southwest rift, this is at elevation of 10,000 feet. You are seeing a little bit of a tilt signal there, right? You can kind of see that there's been a little bit of a rise on this radial signal and then slightly faster rise, and then the tangential signal is coming up and coming across. And not knowing as much about this station here, it's hard to tell how much of this could be environmental. But because of the timing of it, right, it does look like there could be some movement of that magma, and it's pushing the flanks and it's kind of spreading its effects further outwards as well, right? So curious to see if this pops up in conversation at any point in time. Otherwise, our 2-year GPS stations, let's see if I can zoom into these so you can see them a little better. Here is 12,570 feet on the southeast flank at Pineapple Trail, and moving rapidly to the east, moving rapidly to the south, and still rising. There's that same rise visible at 12,570 feet. We go to the west flank at 12,140 feet. That one is moving west fast. Its north is actually wiggled around. It was going more to the south, and now it's wiggled back to the north. But the up is certainly at a higher rate than it was prior to August, and it's continued that upward rate from August unchanged here too. All right, if we come down to 10,300, west flank at Sleeping Cave, now you can see that the up signal is not really that changed from that long-term pattern, maybe, but there's really so much scatter in here, not really convincing compared to the other signals there. So all these signals are the flank is also still moving. This area still moves to the south, and it still moves to the west. You can see here, right at 10,000 feet, 300 feet, but really at this elevation, we're not seeing that rising effect anymore. Right, and so here 8670, not seeing it there either. 7570, don't see it there either. So it's really just that uppermost section. Ocean View Station is not pulling in data online. So it's actually fairly localized to that upper 12,000 foot. That's a 5,700 meter area, right? It's a pretty high area. That's considered just that upper summit part, not even officially the rift zones of the volcano. So definitely lifting and filling and localized there. And on the northeast, you really don't see anything, right? So just scroll it through here, and there's not really anything else to show there. Okay. So what's going on there? And let me bring up this figure from Varugo and Amelung from 2021 once again. And this is all modeling based on GPS and INSAR that they've synthesized from the computer model. And the result was that from, here's how I'll do it. I'll zoom in on this graph here first. This is the magma influx graph. Right, so this is millions of cubic meters from 2002 to 2020. Right, which is what we're looking at. So you actually had a pulse come in from 2002 to 2006. That put in, well, it looks like roughly 60 million cubic meters. Slows down a little bit. By 2010, from 2010 to 14, it's basically not putting in magma. You see the flank moving instead. But from 2014 to 2020, you see actually a fairly rapid rise. And you actually rise from, it looks like somewhere around 90 to about 200 million cubic meters. So you have 110 million cubic meters in these 6 years, ending 2 years ago. That's about the same amount as Kilauea crater has filled in the last year, right? So to give you some idea of the size of that. So that same amount of lava or magma is filled with the Mauna Loa in 6 years, and you would imagine that based on the INSAR and GPS we've seen from USGS, that this rate is likely to continue upwards here for the last 2 years as well, right? But it's not actually drawn on a plot there. So really, when I say that magma has been coming into the volcano since 2014 at a high rate, this is what I mean here. That's the influx of magma right there, right? And you really could go back all the way to 2002 and say that really it's been 200,000 or 200 million cubic meters since 2002 have been coming to the volcano, right? And correspondingly, this means that that actual long blade of magma that's filling the volcano, that's actually the main magma reservoir, has to be widening to accommodate all this magma getting in there. It's filling in there, right? So they have correspondingly here how much that area would widen. And that's an area that we're talking about being like a 5-mile long blade, 2.5 miles tall, something like that, or 2 miles tall, somewhere in there. So that whole thing is swelling, right? So really, since 2002, that thing has opened 4 meters, right? We're talking about, what's that, like 16, 18 feet or so? Let's see if I can get the proper number to tell you here. So in the last so it's been 8 feet in the last 6 years, 2.5 meters, or it's been 15 feet or 4.5 meters for the last through 2020, those 18 years, right? So kind of the last 20 years. And that, in case these numbers and millions of cubic meters, right? This amounts to a total of 29 billion gallons in this section there, right? And you go all the way back, then you're looking at 53 billion gallons for the whole shebang here from 2002 all the way to 2020. So a lot of magma has been coming in, and this is really one perspective to say, okay, well, magma is coming in. There's earthquake swarms. That blade was shown to actually be moving to the south in 2015. It was shown to the inflation center moving back towards the caldera. Beyond that, and it seems to be still in that area, more or less, the caldera and its upper southwest rift zone, similar to what it's been. And in that perspective, really, nothing has changed as far as what the volcano has been doing, right? This is kind of par for the course, and you could say that we're really seeing an evolution and a response, really, from the agencies, right? From the national park by closing the summit backcountry at Mauna Loa, to the USGS by providing daily updates, given the great interest and need for planning, not just by local residents, but county officials as well, right? And also prompting everyone to take it seriously and to actually plan and prepare, right? And that's why we then consider what the worst case scenario might actually be. So we'll get to worst case scenario here in a minute, but first just review a couple of the historical patterns. So here's lava flows from 1843 to 2018. These are all the historical eruptions. There's one earlier in 1832 that is kind of questionable. No lava was ever found, so we're excluding that one here. Starting at 1843 to through essentially 1984 was the last eruption of Mauna Loa there, right? So Of those 33 historical eruptions, 7 have occurred in the southwest rift zone, over here. And only once in 1887 has there been a southwest rift eruption that followed a northeast rift eruption, right? That was 1881 over here, that big flow, and then 1887 was the only pairing of a northeast rift eruption followed by a southwest rift eruption. So of all those events, only once, right? That's 3% of the time has there been a southwest rift eruption following a northeast rift eruption. Whereas almost 50% of the time, 48% of the time, you have lava erupting in the summit area, starting at the summit and ending at the summit as well, right? So that's more likely to happen than the southwest rift zone. However, if we, I'm not sure how much I can zoom in here, but down here is Hawaiian Ocean View Estates. That's actually overlapping piece of the rift zone, and so for that reason, this is a really high exposure and a possibility that it can happen, even if it is only a 3% chance, right? You really want to make sure that you're prepared, especially in those zones. There's lava zone 1 here in the upper quarter of Leilani, and zone 2 just below there as well, right? Lava doesn't necessarily have to break out in the rift zone all the way into Ocean View to affect this South Kona area. It could break out further up on the rift and flow down to impact the Circle Island Highway, right? Or some of these upper developments that exist on the flanks of Mauna Loa here as well. So it's the southwest area that has the highest eruption rates. It has the steepest slopes and shortest distance to the ocean. And so that's why there can be, within hours, there can be significant impact of eruptions there. And that's the area where we're really stressing the most preparedness and most planning, because that's where you have the worst time, the least time to respond. And if the lava does leak out elsewhere and go to the northwest, and you're looking at a matter of days to weeks. If it goes out to the northeast, you're looking at weeks to months. So there's time to talk about it further beyond that, and do more planning and see it coming kind of thing. But it's really the southwest rift zone over here that's this worst case scenario that you see all the activation of the official agencies likely taking place because of that possibility, and because of, you'd imagine, more collaboration and more working together between Haima State and USGS and Hawaii County Civil Defense and Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, all those agencies all together, right? So that's a little bit of the historical record there. If it does come out of the Southwest Rift without staying at the summit, next, that would really break most historical patterns, right? So that's not what to expect. That's the worst case. That's what to plan for. But that's not what to expect based on what history has told us, right? And it's notable that this 1881-1887 pair, that occurs in this previous phase of Mauna Loa. Mauna Loa is much, much more active. That lasted till 1950. And really, since then, it's been Kilauea's show, right? And Kilauea has been more active, and Mauna Loa always only had the 75 eruption and 1984 eruption since then. So that kind of adds a little bit of unknown, but it also seems to have been a downshift in activity of the volcano, right? So I have even more doubt that they jump straight from a northeast rift to a southwest rift. So more than likely have an eruption start at the summit, stay at the summit, and then ends. And then, because the last eruption was in the northeast rift, and they often do alternate, and we have seen signs of magma inflating this upper southwest rift, it's a fair prognosis that a southwest rift eruption is likely, or possibly even more likely, right, than a northeast rift eruption there. So following that next summit eruption, and it seems like you usually get at least a year historically, but as Dane mentioned earlier, that historical record is limited, and maybe you get something that breaks that pattern as well. But historically, there's been at least a year between that summit eruption and then that southwest rift eruption, right? So right. Hopefully there still is time to plan in between there. But that's what to expect. I just put that out there now, not to scare anyone that's going to happen right now. But so when you're thinking of the planning and the preparation, the procedure, that's the kind of thing you can look at. And we've put out quite a bit of information as far as steepest ascent lines, how to use Truesdale inundation zones, all that stuff. And that can help with your kind of micro planning, right? Like, where exactly is my driveway in a property? Is lava going to cut off my driveway before it hits my house? Or is my house actually in danger? Or like, those kind of things, right? Is there more than one way out from this area? Or do I have livestock? Or those kind of things, are things you could start planning, considering with those kind of maps and those kind of publications, right? So,
Yep.
There's so much to talk about in Mauna Loa. I'm sure that there's a ton of questions coming in, Dane.
Yeah, can I jump in on that before we continue, though?
Yeah.
On the Mauna Loa bit, because it is like what you're saying, though, that first one, the next one, right? It's been such a long time. The sequence, it's expected to go to the summit. I mean, it could break trend, but expected to go to the summit. It's really the one after that that's the great concern. But when that happens, right, when this first one happens, even though we're like, oh, that's not the one, it's the next one, that thing is going to be lit up like the beacons of Gondor. You're going to be able to see it from Hilo to Kona. It's just everybody's going to know Mauna Loa is back erupting again. And the biggest concern for me at that point is panic, right? Panic can kill in every circumstance. And it's all about just, remaining calm, knowing what to, go into USGS, monitoring the situation, and making those cool but decisive decisions, right? To make a move, to get in, to get out, to move your family, move the animals, things along those lines. But, as soon as it goes type of thing, there is time to, catch your breath and think still, right? Because that it's important not to panic in those situations. And that's my biggest takeaway on that. What is the next eruption that I fear? It's that because we haven't had a Mauna Loa eruption since '84.
Right.
And there's a lot of people that have never seen the lava, especially on Kona side compared to like Puna.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's just a concern of all of its own, and it's worth mentioning because it is that important.
Yeah, it's a great point, right? It's a great point. We're laying all this out now, like way in advance, and hopefully you guys will be our online army and help us spread the word of what's real out there, because we're sure no matter what we say, someone's going to come up and be like, oh, everyone's going to die, and the Hawaii Island's going to get destroyed, and all this crazy stuff's going to pop up no matter what we do. But the more of us we have ahead of us to combat it, the better. And so, but that's a question I've seen come up a lot. The main question: if it erupts, where is it going to go? Am I in danger immediately? Right? And so, really, the answer is for almost everyone, it's no. Right? I say almost everyone because there's two exceptions. One is the Mauna Loa Weather Observatory up there in that north flank. That lava spills out of the summit. That they have a big diversion barrier, and I'm sure that part of having official response is talking to those guys. If you're civil defense, you got to be talking to those guys already, right? As well as Pohakaloa training area, right, which is down there, slightly further down the slopes, but for a long-lasting summit eruption, could be exposed to some risk as well, right? So those are the areas that might be more concerned immediately, and everyone else, that's the pattern we've laid it out already here. Anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think that's good. There was a quick question from Kenny Carter, who was just asking if we could drop a link to that map. And we will get that for you.
All right. So this map, I'll copy the link for Dane first, and I'll drop it for him to drop. And this is actually more than just this map. I'll zoom it out. This is the last page of this whole document. That's the list of all the eruptions of Mauna Loa with year, right, that it lasted. And you actually have these columns: a summit phase, flank phase, activity area, and so you can see that every eruption has kind of a summit and flank phase. And then, that's apart from this pattern we're talking about as far as alternation of summit, start summit, end of summit, and then going down to the Southwest Rift. When that eruption comes in the Southwest Rift, likely to start at the summit, migrate to the Southwest Rift rapidly, and then that's the whole sequence kind of the next time. So that's where.
Can you show that paper's title again?
That's it. That's the front page.
That's front page.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a simplified table of Mauna Loa historical activity, modified from Lockwood and Littman, 1987. It's a living document, so it does change when things happen there, right? But this is great, right. So it's been updated, and you can check that out, study and check all the statistics that I've talked about, and look for these patterns yourself. And there's a lot of variation, so good luck with that. I'll try to keep it simple for you guys here thus far.
All right.
Up here.
Well, so, can I move on, Dane? We're going to talk some earthquakes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we're
Go
gonna,
ahead.
Then
We'll talk earthquakes.
when we finish
We'll do
Mauna Loa,
some-
we'll take a break and we can do all the Mauna Loa questions, and then we can kind of go on from there. Does that sound good?
Sounds good. Yeah.
All right. So, what I want to start off with is just a little clip here. This is from that talk we had last month at After Dark in the Park that we had Two Pineapples collaboration to stream. And this is Deputy Scientist in Charge David Phillips talking about these earthquakes on Mauna Loa, right? And so I just wanted to play this because there's a couple prompts in here that I think are useful.
Up here on Mauna Loa, we've been at increased level for a couple of years of seismicity, and every now and then we have one of these big earthquake swarms where we start having hundreds of earthquakes over the course of a day. And so we had one of these swarms start last Friday. And it was, not enough. We're not concerned about an eruption happening right now based on the swarm as it is right now, but it's an indication that, yes, magma is accumulating, there's activity there. Eventually, Mauna Loa will erupt. We don't think anything is going to happen right now, but we're watching it very carefully because when it does erupt, it could go with very short notice. So we're
just keep in mind, this talk was given 2 weeks ago. I'll keep it going now.
Watching these with great interest, and you've may have seen the information statements that we put out in civil defense, redirect some of those as well. The last time it erupted was 84, but it's certainly stirring. These are the earthquake swarms of the last 3 years. It's elevated, and then last spring we had kind of a surge. And we were working with civil defense and IEMA, getting ready in case something happened. Nothing happened. Earlier this
So I just want to pause it right there. You guys hear what he said? He said last spring, 2021, they saw elevated rates. They started working with civil defense and HAIMA in case something were to happen, but nothing happened, right? I just wanted to highlight that because you can see that this is the plot from 2 weeks ago before we had this extra spike here on the right. So the activity was equally high, right? So you can see that if that was the case back 1 year ago, then certainly they're following the same protocols and working with civil defense and HAIMA currently now as well, right? So that's the activation that I refer to, as well as having already seen a national park close the backcountry summit of Mauna Loa. Let me let him finish it off here.
year we had one earlier this summer, and then this is the one that we're in right now.
Yeah, and also the mayor has been
This is a
sitting in
close-up
on
view
those
of the earthquakes beneath Mauna
briefings
Loa
by
the last couple
USGS.
weeks. You can see
Yeah.
go up. We're seeing it come down over the last couple of days, but it hasn't gone all the way back down yet. So we're watching this.
Right, the mayor is actually officially the head of civil defense, and we have an administrator that runs everything. So appropriately, he is sitting in on those as well, right? So let me let him summarize here.
Mauna Loa eruptions usually begin at the summit, and there's usually a significant increase in seismicity, much more than what I just showed. But again, the onset could be quick. So we're watching that. Damaging flank earthquakes, again, could happen at any time. And before the last two Mauna Loa eruptions, months before, we actually had very large earthquakes. And if you walk down to one of the viewing areas at Byron's Ledge tonight, you're walking on the old earthquake road, where the road that you're walking on was damaged by the 1983 earthquake.
All right, so that last point I also wanted to highlight here, right? Now maybe I can zoom in if you guys maybe can't read that. Right, so we mentioned the seismicity in the sequence, but when you have magma filling the summit of the volcano, right, and pushing on the flanks, that's when you can have these damaging flank earthquakes get set off, right? And in fact, prior to an eruption, it's not uncommon. In fact, the last two had these large events. In 83, it was a 6.6. In 74, it was a 5.5 earthquake, preceding the eruptions by 4 and 8 months, right? So that could be a next step you actually see. It would be another big flank earthquake, and that would be another piece of evidence that would lead us to believe that we're going towards an eruption, actually, and not going through this passive filling model that we've seen for the last 10 years, 20 years or so, right? So we'll come back to this, but I think that's an important thing to notice, to mention, right? And that kind of comes in line with what we're going to see from Volcano Watch this week as well. One concern USGS has at present is earthquakes can get everybody, right? The lava is going to go hardly anywhere, but the earthquakes could actually do quite a bit of damage, and that could be the main impact of what this build-up to eruption actually occurs, right? So that is the preparedness theme of the week here, is the earthquakes and preparing for the earthquakes because of this possible change in triggering by the inflation of the volcano. And they kind of can go back and forth. If you have the inflation of the volcano trigger an earthquake, then that could then cycle into a future eruption as well. So that's just something to mention here. And we'll dig into this a little bit more. And I thought I would do this by just doing a quick case study that I came across while trying to learn some stuff about Mauna Loa to share with you guys here. And so this is a plot that was shown at that presentation last week. Earthquakes per day here, and showing that early 2021 activity and then a more recent activity coming up here, right? So you probably can't quite read this unless I zoom it way in, but it's earthquakes per day over here on the left. And there is the 100 earthquake per day line right there. So if we move it across, you can see that we're at 100, 120 earthquakes per day was the peak of that spring event, right? Right. So going back to a different talk from the USGS on Mauna Loa from the previous year, maybe a couple years before that, 2021 actually, right? And in that time, they had plotted January 2021, the beginning of the increase of that activity there. So they're actually showing in January 2021 about 150 to 200 earthquakes per day, and prior to that, back in 2019, getting above 100 a couple of times, and nearing this 100 earthquake per day threshold right there quite a few times. Back in February 2019, here's August 2019, right? Actually exceeded it in October 2019. There was November and December is when that started. 2020. And then you can see all the way to the right that other activity there. So these values, so here, January 2021 of 150 to 200, and I'll pull it back to this one. January 2021 is here. Oh, come on. Respond. Just doing so well. Spinning ball, okay. So, stuck again. There is January, oh, I'm sorry, so January 2021 is this one right here. So come back across, and that is showing less than 60 earthquakes per day on this plot. So clearly there's some filtering that occurs, and these are both real data. They're just slightly different parameters of what's been put out there, right? So that said, there has been talk, and I mentioned this before, that it's the events that occurred in 1984 and 1975 that we use for comparison had different instrumentation, different seismometers, that they were not as good at detecting the smaller earthquakes in particular. So it's really hard to compare those absolute numbers of earthquakes back from 75 and 84 to what you're seeing on a seismometer today, because we're going to pick up a lot more today, given a greater sensitivity of today's instruments. That's kind of the real, wrench in the whole system for most people there, to have to understand that, okay, the raw values reported by the USGS of the 50-something today, those are not all above 1.6. So you can't compare those to the 1.6s from before, right? So one way to try to get at this that I thought I'd share with you guys today is coming through the Iris Earthquake Browser. So starting off here, I just wanted to put in, so let's show you guys the range here. We're looking at just this last 3 weeks back to September 20th, 2022, and looking at all the earthquakes, just so you can kind of see the summary of how this has developed. And there is our distribution, so our first pulse on the 23rd, and our second pulse on the 29th and 30th. And really you can see, if I zoom it in, really you can see that the earthquake counts are still there, but they've dropped significantly since that peak, those two peaks back in the end of September. So on a map view here, let's see if I can get it to actually play through, keep playing, play it again. And you see how they accumulate there. You see that big burst in September 23rd, a small pause, and here comes the second burst. There it is. And then all the activity since then is just filling in that same area, as you can see there. Okay, so that's the current event. Now let's rewind and show you guys all the way back to 2014, I believe. That's it. Catches up to me here. Tried to preload these to save some time, but it does not seem to be perspective today. All right, so 2014 to today, we're using all magnitudes. So put it on here so it's clear. And here's our histogram. And you can see that the recent activity here at the right, maybe I'll zoom it in so you can see it actually there. Here it is to the right, but this is back to 2014. So you can see 2017, big spike there. There's a 2021 spike in there, and then here we are. And remember, this is all events, right? So, okay, let me play it so you can just see, since 2014, what's been normal. And what you can hopefully see is upper southwest rift, summit, and this area northwest, all activating. You even get a few extra clusters here more to the north, and this widespread southeast flank pattern, right? So you can see the longer it runs, the more it's filled in. So by the time we get to this most recent flurry here in the last few weeks, you can barely tell it apart from what happened before, right? It's basically just filling in that same area. It's definitely added and made it more populated in there, but it's not really expanding the area. It's all in the same zone, doing the same thing as it's been doing since 2014, and a map view as well. Okay, let's get this to speed up a little bit. Let's get it to load this next one. I think we'll go back just to 2018, and we'll do some comparisons now of what these histograms look like with these different thresholds of magnitude. So let's have a display here that we're starting in 2018. Spin ball, there it is. Let's display here that we're using all magnitude values. And let's go down here to the histogram, right? And this is really what I'm interested in. You can see the map pattern is the same. I don't have to cover that anymore, but there's what the histogram looks like. This is all values for all magnitudes, right, going back to 2018. So here we are. There is that earlier in 2022 and 2021. You can see that going back to 2018. Those are the two biggest spikes here. All right, I'm going to move on already. I don't need to belabor this, but 2028 or 2018, and now we'll select just 1.6 and higher, as that is the more relevant threshold to compare. And by doing that, we'll learn something. So let's just display it here. Magnitude range greater than 1.6. Come to the histogram. And now if you look at the histogram of values above 1.6, you see that we actually are missing a spike in 2021, right? So even though that we had a lot of earthquakes in 2021, most of them were less than magnitude 1.6. And in contrast to that, the ones we've had now are the most voluminous above 1.6 in any time in this last 3-year period, right? So you can imagine if you're looking at that as a larger threshold and the amount of energy being released, you'd get a much different picture of this histogram compared to the one that just showed you, right, with all values. There's all values. And then there is just the 1.6 and higher values. It'll flip eventually. There, 1.6 higher values. So pretty dramatic difference there, and you can see how that could cause you some extra concern, and especially if you're considering that. Those thresholds. So let's see. See if this one will load now in due time, and I can show you here, and I might have to skip some of these if they hang too long, but pull them out intentionally to share. Let's see if I can get it to follow through. All right, time range. I believe a new computer is going to have to be in the works here, so we're looking at 2020, all values. And there's a histogram, 2020, all values. There's kind of zoomed in on that 2021 spike. And let's do it one more time. And I'll just come down to the animate and zoom into that before looking at anything else, just to try to speed it along here. And likewise, what you're going to see is that earlier spike once again disappears, and I just thought I could make it bigger and more zoomed in to show you guys how that is being impeded somewhat by the technology here. Okay, there it is. So there is 1.6 and higher, and there is all values, right? So you really see that stark difference there. Okay, let me try to close some of this stuff so it'll remember what it needs to do. That one. Oh, that might have been, no, nothing. Apologies, you guys. And see these histograms. Scroll back over here one more time. Get this thing to speed up a little bit for us here. And we're almost to Mauna Loa question time. I'm sure you guys are just dying to hear more discussion and be involved in the conversation here. I'm eager to hear you as well. You can just get this browser to collaborate here. Eventually we'll get there. All right. So this is the last few slides of these Iris browsers here are the 75 and 84 eruptions that I want to show you guys for comparison. So this one is 84. And once again, only 1.6 and higher, so we can compare those similar values. And in that case, you can see, maybe you can see the distribution pattern here, right? So there it is. And there is that summit activity in late 1983, which then dies back down. And eruption actually occurs here in 1984, right in there, right in here, in this zone right in here. And then we actually have migration to the flank occurring slightly afterwards there, right? But as far as patterns, that's the distribution right there, right? Summit activity right in there in 84. And then a few months later, with not a whole lot of extra ramp up in these bigger earthquakes at least, but perhaps some of the smaller ones, you see the eruption actually manifest there, right? But there are other signals like gas and tilt and GPS and things like that. All right, let's see if this one is a 75. On 75. So there's 75, and let's look at the histogram and zoom it in for you guys. So 74, there is that activity that's precursory, right? A couple of these larger spikes, and then in 75 you get the eruption there, summit eruption there. Right? So you actually see in this case you had quite a few of these. 1, 2, 3, and then the fourth was after the fourth one that it actually finally erupted at the summit there. And so there's a distribution pattern of them as well, similar, maybe slightly more dispersed here, but very similar patterns you see every time at the summit of Mauna Loa there for the earthquakes. All right, so there's one last one. Here it is. And we're back to 84, and I just want to expand it a little bit, because what we were talking about, and we heard deputy scientists in charge talk about these potentially damaging flank earthquakes, right? So this is 84, and now I've expanded it to include this zone of Kauiki area, which is where that larger earthquake occurred, right? So the reason I wanted to do this is to bring up this animation here. If I can get this zoomed in a little more. But maybe what you can see there is, right, there's actually two spikes here, right? So and really, what I showed you before, the summit spike is this one. And then this is a Kauiki earthquake and aftershock sequence that follows it, right? So this is the flank movement. This is a normal large earthquake aftershock sequence you see right there. So summit, and then the flank following, and then eruption happening later on, right? So that gives you a little bit of a bigger picture, but it's not quite what we're comparing before. But let me show you guys. Coming up, this is a background activity in 83. Here comes a summit flare right in here. There it goes. And then here comes the flank motion following a few months afterwards there. Right, so really, flank earthquakes could be a significant impact here, and that's why the USGS is talking about that. However, our current earthquakes map, here it is for the last 2 weeks. You can see activity at the summit, but we're not getting activity in a flank here, really here, or on a Kona flank either, right? So we are currently not having that similar activity quite yet, but that could be what to look for if it were to progress towards eruption here, right? And once again, from this paper, the 74 eruption was a summit eruption only. That I believe is the more likely version of what we're liable to get. And in that case, let's see, where's the graph? There it is. You can see once again these various spikes, right? And so this is number of now it's going back to all earthquakes greater than 0.1, and this is with the old not sensitive instruments. So these are minimum values, right? And really in 74 it began. This is 500 earthquakes per day. So 100 earthquakes per day is down here, right? So that's the 100 earthquakes per day threshold. If you imagine our plot, we saw something like this. If you start seeing more of them, and you see them get higher and then more frequent, and then the whole background stays up there, right? We might be getting some of this darker back 50 per day background like this going on as well, right? So maybe we're in something more like this, right? But we're not quite spiking quite as high, and we haven't seen these numbers, and these are minimums. So 400 earthquakes per day in that April 74 event, really. So some comparison and why some of us are not convinced that really this is going to go towards an eruption unless we see more from the monitoring data there.
Can you flash the title of that paper real quick? We have a viewer asking.
That paper is, let me pull that one back. Oh, lost it there. Nope, wrong one. This is Professional Paper 1350 from the USGS and Chapter 19, which is the exact title if I get it to scroll up here, but it's like the decade of eruptive and intrusive activity at Mauna Loa volcano, 1974 to 1984. There it is. By John Lockwood, John Borak, Tom English, Robert Koyanagi, Arnold Nakamura, Marjorie Summers, and Will Tanigawa. Yeah. So yeah, you can find these USGS professional paper online as well. Okay, so one last thing, and that is the Volcano Watch, Earthquakes and Volcanoes, Recipe Preparedness. So I just wanted to throw that up here before we switch to our question time discussion, because we've been talking about earthquakes preparedness, and it's just where this fits, even though I've been talking for long enough already. But today's article by geophysicist Jefferson Chang, and you can see outlining the history of earthquakes and that association of earthquakes and eruptions, and addressing whether Mauna Loa will erupt soon, and similar discussion lines as we've mentioned here today, right? It may be snoring a little louder than it did a few years ago, but does not necessarily mean that it will wake up soon. There are many different monitoring streams to document changes. Some of those may alert when eruptions more likely. Large shallow earthquakes are one of the indicators that that move the probability of eruption from not necessarily to highly likely. For example, that 6.7 earthquake a few months before the last eruption of Mauna Loa in 84, 1950 as well, 2 days prior to the onset, and other ones not associated like Kalapana or other eruptions of Mauna Loa there. So, and really the important thing here is that large shallow earthquakes are not just a potential precursor to eruptions, but can be a disaster on their own, and that's really the real take-home message here. So the damage can be mitigated by preparedness, right? Drop, cover, hold on. There's shakeout that occurs every year. That's a nationwide preparedness drill that occurs 1 week from today, Thursday, October 20th, right? At 10:20, that's 10/20th, at 10:20 a.m. local time. That's the Great Hawaii Shakeout, where that'll be before our next live stream, obviously, right? But you can sign up at shakeout.org and participate and commit here to earthquake preparedness. All right, Dane. That's enough talking for me. Oh, I can't
All
hear
right.
you.
Yep.
Oh.
Well, we got a decent amount of questions here for you. Do want to start out by thanking some super chats that we had come through. We had several. want to acknowledge all of those. Did I lose chat? Oh no. What happened to chat? I'm unable to see him now. Okay, well, I'll go from memory. We had $35 from our longtime supporter, Gary Bryant. We had, I believe, $20 from longtime supporter, Chris. We had, oh man, $20 from, I believe it was Fishery Tours. Sorry for your messages. I did read them. I just am used to having these available, and right now I do not. Anyways, if I missed your super chat, I know I missed at least one or two in there. I think I do have one question. There was a $20 super chat from Christopher who asks, what is your best guess for when lava lost will be exceeded and ooze up flows will happen again? I believe this is Kilauea Summit.
Well, I'm going to talk all about that in Kilauea. Let's.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I'll briefly say we have not caught up the volume we lost during the collapse yet. Right. I mean,
Right.
So we basically we have a new map we'll talk about that was issued from October 5th, but the volume is actually less than the previous map, barely, slightly, marginally there. So we'll talk about that in detail here coming up. How much might have actually been lost and what we might get out of what's going on here. Good question. Had the same.
All right. Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's do some. And again, if I missed your super chat, I apologize. I'll write them down next time. That is a new one for me, not being able to retrieve those easily. But we have some good questions here. First one was by Richard, who asked about the cooled shields and the sills. Does the cooled shields or like the different layers of lava create the sills or the potential for the sills to form there?
It's whatever weaknesses exist in the rock, right? So you have kind of, the magma pushing in, gravity pulling down, but you also have, it's been postulated that the last time the caldera collapsed at Mauna Loa and formed the Great Caldera, which is that outer crack, not the main one you see today, but an even bigger one, that has some rubble and collapse zones that are more horizontal within that structure of the volcano as well. So there are areas where the weakness is more horizontal and there are areas where the weakness is more vertical. So the vertical weakness seems to run, along the rift zone under the summit, kind of that long blade-like direction. But somewhere there's shallow, there's connecting to that blade, there's a shallow sill also that kind of feeds over to that southeast part. Right, so that can lift up and the other one can spread apart, and then that's that combination, that's the complexity in there, and that makes it hard to model and hard to really untangle the signals, and it's not always clear what's going on, that kind of complexity there, right? But at least we're learning more about it as we go along, right? And it's more than we imagined we even knew before. So, but yeah, there are other cooled dikes and sills in the area for sure that are likely creating other horizons within the rock. There's also, I don't know if I even open this whole can of worms, but we have in the past before, right? There have been likely glaciations in Mauna Loa in the past as well. So you could have layers of glacial till in there somewhere embedded under that lava flow somewhere, and those could be zones of weakness you could inject lava into. That could be sills too. So there's whatever kind of thing is embedded in the volcano, whatever weakness exists, those variable, whether it's big solid flows or thin pohoi flows with lots of bubbles, that kind of thing can matter when the lava is trying to push and inject into that material underground many thousands of years later.
All right. We do have a good question here from Dude who asks, could the lift at higher elevations on Mauna Loa be a sign that it's already at capacity at lower levels?
Well, so yeah, that's a great question, yeah, and that's why I went through and showed the GPS at different elevations, right? Because if you'd imagine that the more if the top is where it's kind of caught and it's filling more and more and more, then you should see the effects spread further and further downhill to lower elevations. But we don't see it yet, where it's actually still at that elevation that's still considered to be fully within that summit bubble and not even part of the rift zones yet. So if we see it move down lower elevations, then yes, dude, that would be the likely conclusion there, something like that. But it's not what we're seeing quite yet. And within that summit region, you have the complexity I just described. So then it's kind of anything it's fair game in there, and until it does something different than that, then not convincing it's moved out of there yet.
Yvonne asks, I'm wondering how deep these flank earthquakes are. Is there any data available I can check?
Yeah, I mean, really, the Iris earthquake browser can lets you go back and pick any of these years, right? But normally they're occurring, Yvonne, they're occurring at those flank depths, right? You're still talking like 6-8 kilometers down, something like that, more or less. Not super deep and not super shallow either, but enough to actually move the flank to the sides, right? So that's just my estimate there. Maybe we can look that up and put it in the chat at some point, or someone else can crowdsource that for us if Dan can't get to it here.
Yeah, I'll try and do that after this segment. We have a question from Raghav, who asks, how much VOG comes to Hilo from Mauna Loa eruption?
That's a good question that I really don't know. I wasn't around in '84 to give that assessment. There's some discussion that the upper level winds are different, right? So you could actually have stuff dispersed in different parts of the island, but it might actually be trapped aloft and not as much of it might make it down. So you might not get as much gas, but you might still get ash and small particles of lava falling, kind of thing. That's possible, like Pele's hairs kind of things. I don't really know. That's just the best guess there, right?
Right.
We've seen a little bit about that in the past. Reports of VOG, maybe I think more so in Kona. But I would have to go back and dig those up to address that properly and sufficiently there. So, good question. I don't really have the best answer, Raghav.
Right. Adam asks, what does the state plan to do if lava makes its way to Hilo?
Well, if it goes towards Hilo, it's going to be something that there are weeks to months to prepare. And so we'll see exactly which path the flow is going down towards Hilo. And quite often the flows that go towards Hilo go down towards the saddle first, and then they have to make a right-hand turn and go down that saddle between Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa towards Hilo, kind of down that Wailuku Valley area.
Right.
So you kind of see which steepest descent line, which little valley, which little gully it starts picking, and that kind of allows you to kind of focus which area it might actually go. It's not going to take out all of Hilo if it were to last long enough to even get to Hilo. That's kind of two things. One, it has to last long enough to get to Hilo, which means it's got to get to that steep part to the flat part, turn right, and actually keep going all the way down without stalling and fanning out and breaking further upslope where it's steeper again. And in '84, that's what happened. It went downhill and broke uphill, and went downhill and broke back uphill, like over and over and over again. So that's kind of part one. And then part two is if it does keep going in one little area, you'd know to focus your evacuations and your preparedness and whatever you're going to do one neighborhood or one strip of neighborhoods through Hilo, and that's what the Truesdale inundation maps are really for.
Right, and all those riverbeds and
put up. But that's an article we have that I'm sure that didn't put in the chat as well.
Yeah, and all those riverbeds that run up through Kalmana and everything play big importance when it comes to time to figure out where the lava is going and where it's going, and what the potential is. All right. We have one question here from Fishery Tours who donated. He was wondering about the swarms at Pahala and the swarms at Napapo being negative surface depth. So I think the just wondering about the range of earthquakes, maybe like the deep ones and then the shallow or ones that we see.
Yeah, so Pahala has two sets of earthquakes. It's got all the big ones that are deep, but it also has quite a few shallow ones that are above the deep ones, right? So the idea is magma is moving down where the deep ones are activating, but that whole pressure from way deep down is pushing upwards. It's like having a stack of magazines, and you're kind of lifting from the bottom, and the magazines are kind of wiggling, and the one on the very top is wiggling a little more because it's free in the surface kind of thing. So the earthquakes at the very, very top of the land, right above that Pahala zone, are also quaking. But there's a gap between them, which suggests to us there's not actually magma pushing its way up and through. Right, I showed you guys a plot of Mauna Loa's cross section with a clear line of earthquakes from deep to shallow. That's the kind of what you look for magma going upwards. You don't see that in Pahala, and so it seems to be just like pressure that's just kind of propagating up that stack of layers of rock within the volcano there. We'll know,
Right.
know a lot more, and really, like, this is all just best guess. We'll know a lot more when USGS and researchers put out the results of their seismic survey this past summer, where they try to image that whole area, and that's when we'll really learn what's going on, and be able to answer questions better, and come back and laugh at ourselves for how little we knew.
We have another question from Raghav, who asks, if the blade of lava is under the southwest rift right now, isn't it more likely that's where the eruption will migrate?
Yeah, so it has been pushing into that upper southwest rift area, but that upper southwest rift area is commonly activated along with a summit, right? So you really have to get it down below that 3,700 meter, 12,000 foot elevation, 3,660, I think it was on that map that we showed, for it to be considered outside the summit, and then to be considered it actually migrating, right? It could actually erupt up, at 13,000 feet on the southwest rift and be considered a summit eruption still. Right? That's kind of part of the definition game we play here. Just this is the shape and dynamics of how the patterns actually play out. So, if it does migrate, when it eventually does migrate, that is why that is an area that's the preferred candidate right now, right? And we might learn more. In the following 75, there was a clear, following the end of eruption at the summit, there was a clear migration of earthquakes down the east rift zone, northeast rift zone of Mauna Loa, to the location where in 84 it would pick back up again and resume that flank eruption. So if you see something like that happening, then that also gives you an idea, like, oh, okay, it started at the summit, we actually see earthquakes migrate down the southwest rift, and so it's pretty clear that's where it's going to be next time. And you can prepare a lot better for that, right? However, where it migrates to, like, then wherever it breaks out, when it comes to the surface, it can then flow down either direction, and that kind of expands the possible effect of that situation, right? So, yeah, right. That's basically right, Raghav. But it has to go a little bit further for it to be considered a migration out of the summit. Basically, yeah.
All right, we'll do one more for Mauna Loa. Kinika asks, in your opinion, when, as in what month, do you think it's more likely to erupt?
Which month?
Which
Maybe
month?
I should go look at the tide chart. I don't know, but that's we're getting into a situation where if everything's like ready to go and poised to go, like that's when you can have the tides have effect. That's when you can have these other events have effect. So now is when you can have these other, normally you'd be like, can so-and-so cause an eruption? I'd be like, nah, there's no way. But if it's ready to go, and I'm not convinced it is, but if it is, then I might guess, at the maximum tides, But, my honest guess at this point is I'm not convinced it's going to eruption yet. I'm not even willing to put it out like a year yet. So, and not to say that it can't come up sooner than that, but I have to see more before I'm willing to say more than that. Right? And not to say that no one should plan and prepare for the worst case as if it would happen next week, right? Or tomorrow.
Right.
But that's not what I personally expect.
All right, so I was going to end it there with the question, but Clarissa asked the real question. So it's going to get in. Will there be a time to warn Ocean View residents before eruption happens? That is the real question. In the worst case scenario, if your worst case scenario that USGS has told us about that they, plan for is 8 hours from signal start to, eruption, lava's coming type thing. It's going to be rough. I don't see the plan currently in place that works fast enough type of thing. And that's hopefully what, gets done in the upcoming near-term future is some kind of plan on how this goes, because the margin for error there is small. It's very small.
Yeah, so that's, worst case scenario would be 8 hours from summit, and it has to go straight down to the ocean view without stopping anywhere in a way, and then park itself right there and erupt right then and there, and like not go anywhere else afterwards, which never happens either.
No,
it always starts at the top and it starts working its way down and progresses a little more and goes a little more and goes a little more, and then the earthquakes migrate down ahead of it, just like Leilani. So the earthquakes underground for a few days ahead of time, and then you start thinking, so there is a progression for sure, and it could be accelerated for sure, but the eruption is still going to start at the summit first before it comes down a rift, most likely, right? Even if it's like for 2 minutes, it's going to be like, okay, here I am at the summit, and then you have your worst case 8-hour clock or something like that. But you might have 12 hours, you might have a day, you might have 2 days. Leilani had how long really? A couple days?
The thing was, though, is we had days and then people stayed, and then Hell Night happened, and we had to run anyways, type of thing. Even though it was the eruption had already been going for over 3 weeks.
Right, ignoring that part of it, like the start part of it, right? A couple of days, really, before, when it was obvious earthquakes were in the ground and something was going to happen. So that's what to likely expect, but worst case, it could be what we just described.
Yeah. We hope, the expectation is it's not worst case, and you will be able to have time, but worst case gets rough. It gets rough. All right. Well, I think that'll do it for Mauna Loa questions. We will do another segment here coming up. So if you have any questions, go ahead and get them in the chat, and we will get them thrown to Philip if I can't answer them for you there. So if you want to take it away, Philip, back to you.
One last mahalo, Dane, to Vai.
Oh, right. Yeah, then you want me to take that one?
Yeah, I got it on the screen here.
All right, the Vai grant, we really appreciate them. They've ensured that we're going to be able to continue to produce this type of content for you for the next year, as well as do some other things to help some community groups and some other nonprofits that we work with around the island to bolster themselves and their outreach. So we really thank the County of Hawaii and the Vai grant program to really, take this up, because it's not something that you see every day being funded, but we put in a lot of work to get here, and we appreciate their support. We really do.
Mahalo, you guys. Mahalo, all super chats. Mahalo, County of Hawaii. We really appreciate it. Thank you. We're working hard. I think you probably can tell. And we're an hour and a half in, and we've only covered one volcano, so I better get to it here, huh?
Yes, sir.
All right. First thing to talk about is just our community corner. I only have one thing to mention. This is our National Park Service events that we've been covering for October. And that is to mention that, oh God, it's not going to move again. But that is to mention that this upcoming Tuesday on the, let's see what day that is here. It's scrolling here. The 18th, 7 p.m. at the Kilauea Visitor Center Auditorium. Jeffrey Judd is going to be giving a presentation on his geological career, working for the USGS, working for the national park. He actually was a beekeeper at my daughter's school as well. He's rescued people from helicopters inside a pu'o'o. He fell into a river of lava during a Maunaloa eruption and pulled himself out and went and got help. So this should be an amazing one. We're going to be streaming that on Tuesday. So check that out. And there are some other events happening over Kahuku at Mauna Loa as well. So you can check out the park website for all of those, including Halloween activities. And still ongoing is a walk into the past with Dr. Thomas Jagger, put on by Kaden, Kilauea Drama and Entertainment Network, and Dick Hirschberger. And you may have seen the video that we just put out this past Tuesday of a little highlights of what that currently feels like. And it's definitely much better to go in person. We did the best we could, of course, to bring that to you guys, since not everyone can come in person. But most Fridays that's occurring 10 a.m. and noon on National Park. Check that out as well. All right, so that is our community corner. We will switch now to earthquakes, which we've covered quite a lot with Mauna Loa already. But here is the whole rest of the island. You can see Pahala earthquake still ongoing. That's what we're discussing there with Fishery Tours. Here is a Kilauea zone. Kilauea is just a few at the summit. South flank is still active on Kilauea. You can see maybe a few Mauna Loa southeast flank a little bit here. Maybe one here and a southwest flank of 2.0. This is fairly deep. But really nothing convincing in the flanks on Mauna Loa either, right? So that's kind of the big picture, just to make sure we cover that. Get one guy out here near Maui, 2.8, Satahana, 28K deep, and one even further out than Luihi, 1.9. So a couple of outliers of just adjustment of the ocean floor to all this action happening geologically here. So Kilauea earthquakes, get the right graph here, which is not this one. I have to say, this most recent update managed to freeze my screen mid-scroll, which is something I haven't seen before. All right, so here's Kilauea, 1 month earthquakes. There is that crater floor drop event that occurred on the 20th. not quite about 3 weeks ago or so, not quite a month ago. And you can see that we're actually at fairly, this is about 40 earthquakes per day before, and we're maybe slightly above that, but it's roughly the same, right? Maybe marginally higher. Maybe we're up to 50 per day, but it's up and down, and nothing really alarming changed in the earthquakes in Kilauea. Over the last week, here is the distribution. Everything is pretty normal there. I zoom it in so you can see the summit pattern better. South flank, deep connector coming into Kilauea, and Pahala over here to the side as well. And over the last month, see more of that summit accommodation to the crater floor drop, and more of this fuller pattern of Pahala in the south flank as well. But that's really it for earthquakes on Kilauea. So we will move on to our observations on Kilauea. Starting with this nice image that Dane pulled out last week here, another sunrise view, this time sunrise on Kilauea. And this has been a typical view for the last 3 weeks since that drop and all those ooze-ups that came up, right? The question came through of when are ooze-ups coming back? And that kind of implies what I'm about to tell you, that there haven't been any ooze-ups since that drop down and all was cooled, right? So the typical view has been this, just the persistent lava lake and the fuming crater floor elsewhere on Kilauea. So advancing here, this is a KW camera for the last week, day and night, just kind of showing you what that actually looks like. I can zoom it in, since, well, I could try, but it might not let me. Besides the main persistent vent, you can see glow from the west vent complex and from this west pond complex right in here as well. Still has me stuck, but okay, I'll just fight it there. So still, that's the activity. There's still lava visible. It's still glowing and circulating and doing all that stuff. Let's move on now. Show you a different angle. This is a S1 camera from earlier in the week. And similarly, you can see there is a west vent complex, west pond vent, and the persistent lake still circulating as usual. You see the southeast pit still glowing, and there's a couple of spots over here to the south and one east of this island also glowing, showing lava is still moving from this circulating lava lake underneath the crust and underneath the rest of the crusted crater floor here as well. All right, so I think I'm pushing it here. Here's a V1 for the last week, day and night, and you can see the circulation pattern is still the same from the west to the east. Same sinks here on the east, northeast, and the south, where it goes through this little crusted over archway into the southeast pit over here, right? And one thing maybe you noticed, and it's hard to really manipulate this so much now, but the flow seems to be coming up through this persistent lake slow enough that we're actually seeing these long slabs of crust, and we're actually seeing occasionally this issuing margin actually building out further and further and further, and then it all breaks away and flushes out. But you're actually seeing more and more of this. It's trying to crust over here from the side, and that just indicates the flow is slow enough that can happen, but it's not too slow where it's fast enough where it's still breaking it up and not allowing it to happen really quite yet. But we'd imagine that if you were to have something like a big deflation event or something like that, that would even reduce the flow even further, you might see this thing start crusting over a little bit more, given this more recent pattern of it crusting over from the end over here. Let's see if it's something I can show you guys again, right? There are times where you see this darkness kind of move all the way over to here. Not as much recently here, but earlier in the sequence, and something to look for as you guys scan the webcams, as I'm sure many of you will. Dedicated volcano watchers here. All right, so moving on to more of these observations and visual observations. We'll go back to what we've had to catch up on from Kilauea. So this is a release from just before that crater floor drop that we did not have a chance to address. I should say just afterwards. So we have some images of that west vent cone. You can see some spatter coming from it and some glow. So that's still ongoing, can be seen for visitors to the park as well. And then zooming into that south pond, and we mentioned this before. We didn't have these images. Here is that double archway. There's one arch and a second arch over here, and the lava went underneath both into the southeast pit here, right? Since this archway is collapsed, we'll show you that. But for those few days here, some nice images here. Here's a wider view of where that fits in to the greater lava lake. And this image from just a few days afterwards is showing quite a bit of exposed pit wall here, showing the lava level dropped quite a bit. And it's come up, it dropped perhaps 10 meters or so, like something like 30 feet, and it's come up about half of that, 5 meters or 15 feet or so. It's not quite up to where it was before, but it's filling, and you're only seeing part of it filling here because the whole rest of the crater floor is also lifting and rising up as well. So that's what this is here. Let's see if I can have to do some maintenance on my browser here, Dane, just for a second. Let me see if I can get this to actually loop on me here.
Yeah, just a little tech issues today. Thanks to everybody for their patience.
Sometimes just gotta push through, and so it goes. So almost there. I guess I've seen my browser's not responding very well today, and
Right.
it's
It happens sometimes. Not much when you can do when you're live too.
it's kind of a interesting thought that the technology can't keep up with me here. I'm trying to push it too far.
Yeah, I
Share
mean, I
too
think
much.
we need newer computers before we start squaring off like that, I think.
See, almost there. Let's see, I got more of these I gotta finish.
Richard said it's 5G's fault.
Come in. Thanks, you guys, for bearing with me. Got any other questions you want to throw out, Dane, while I'm talking, working on this?
Yeah, we had a super chat come through from Judy, $15. Thank you for that. Who says, are the two volcanoes connected by any lava chambers, and will one relieve pressure from or aggravate the other in case of an eruption? Interesting question.
Yeah, we've visited that one before. That's a good one for sure. There is no direct magma connection except down deep by the hotspot source, by those deep Pahala earthquakes, we believe. But the fact that a pathway does exist, even though it's deep down, allows what's termed a pore pressure differential to propagate from one volcano to the other. So if one volcano stops erupting, the other one stops erupting, that pressure can kind of, over the course of 6 months or more, ballpark, move from one volcano to the other and affect them in that way. So there can be a connection there, but it's not an instant connection, and it's not where magma from one can actually move to the other one. Like once it come up and actually fork and split apart, the magma is flowing through its own path, but it can be going under slightly more or slightly less pressure as that kind of propagates slowly across the whole system. That's the best answer there.
Yeah, it's a complicated subject, that one too. Like
we do. I think we did have like a stream highlight on that at some point.
I know we did a giant write-up, and then we never released it too. We might actually finish that up one day.
All right, so I think I have this going here. Let me see if I can get it to actually load. Okay, here we go. So this is the V1 camera, and this is back on September 27th. And if you look at that southeast pit here, which I'll try to zoom it in as soon as I can, as soon as it allows me to, you can see this episode of collapse where that second little archway falls in there. Just have a short little loop there, and just showing that little curiosity and sharing that with you guys here. So let's see if I can get this to go a little slower, and I can zoom it in. There we go. Finally responding. So there is that little archway dropping in on the 27th. Wait for it to reform. We've seen archways form and disappear several times, usually not that far back because it hasn't been so stable for so long, or made that long of a lava channel before and caused that drop to occur. So that is that one, that drop of the archway. And here, what I'm showing next is an F1 camera, and I'm showing the whole last 3 weeks, and I'm really speeding up really fast because it's pretty subtle, right? What I hope you can see is, besides the lava lake flashing here and circulating, is the crater floor is actually lifting up. It's lifting up more slowly. It's not as obvious as before, but it actually is visibly lifting up. The margin seems to be, seems like it moves somewhere right in here. You can see that uplift happening right in there. And it's finally responded, and now it's not anymore. So that's the pattern of Kilauea. It's filling from below. I'll keep moving on since we're running so long already anyways. And there's a B1, and all I've done here is just ever since the collapse, and not including the collapse here, it's just kind of looping on itself here, how much the crater floor has risen in the last 3 weeks, right? So you can't really see it as easily. I asked Dan to pull out just the daytime images here so we could see this more clearly here, this rising of the crater floor on a B1 camera, so you can really believe that that's what's going on here. And that's a little piece of the clip that I showed you first off in our summary. Show you the full animation of the B1 camera back from March when we first had it installed and stabilized and could see this long-term rise of the crater floor. So you see the crater floor rise here, then have a little pop towards the end, and then come up a slight little bit at the very, very end there. Assuming it qualifies. There it goes. There it comes. Rising, rising, rising. August. September. Here comes the drop. Back up again. So that was it. Looping again. August, September. Little drop. Back up. All right. I will move on when I am able. Get us through Kilauea here. There's some interesting things to talk about still. But just to touch base with what is happening currently, since I've been showing you guys all the last 3 weeks, all sped up. Just looking in at the webcams on Kilauea a couple hours ago here. Presuming this side actually moves for me as well. Well, if it doesn't, I can share with you guys. Oh, there's an F1 camera. You see, it looks the same as before. Nothing really has changed in these views. So that's what's going on there. So a couple final observations visually to share with you guys here. Images from USGS on October 5th. Here's an active lake and crater floor. And we'll also have a zoom in on an active lake as well, if we can get to that. Really nothing that I need to pull out from these images, right? You see quite a lot of fog coming out from the fumes here, but there's that wider view. And let's try to get the zoomed in view to load. There's a zoomed in view. And the southeast pit's still active over there as well. So those are the media released. There is one more media page that I'll highlight for you guys here, but I will not be opening any of the media. There was a commemorative 1 year. Oh, it's going to load for us here. 1 year of the Kilauea eruption archive index from the USGS here. So we have starting to load. We have some similar views from B1 time-lapse crater floor rising. We have down below here, we have another F1 loop. But here we go, photo and video chronology commemorating 1 year of eruption in Halemaʻumaʻu Kilauea Summit, September 29th. So there is a 3-minute feature that we streamed as part of that talk. And if you would like to see it again, it is here online. There's images comparing before and after. Here's before and after from 1 year ago, before lava came out, that second phase, and then since. And then there's another version showing the first day of lava in the crater and how much it's filled up since then as well. So cool stuff there, and I will not push it any further than that. I don't move on to try and show you guys the transition to the mapping, right? So here's a UAS mission that was flown October 5th. Here is the drone that was flown to create that 3D map of the summit. So that produces thermal maps, and such as this one. So there's a thermal map from October 5th showing that wider caldera view with the crusted over crater floor in bluish here. That's got lava underneath it as well. It's just crusted over. And then once this scrolls up a little more, you'll be able to see the red of the active lake down here as well. There it is. That's the wide view. And there is a zoomed in view of that thermal view. All right, so going to move on. show you guys the actual map from October 7th. So here is a reference map from October 7th, showing the extent pretty similar to what it was that previous iteration. But the actual statistics are where you can find some of these details. The rise since the beginning of the eruption has not changed from before, still at 470 feet, 143 meters. The volume is still 29.2 billion gallons, or 110.6 million cubic meters. Let's zoom this in. Well, I should for you guys there. Full lava extent, 294 acres, 119 hectares. So that's pretty similar to what we had the previous iteration. We actually had 110.7 million cubic meters, so 0.1 million cubic meters less this iteration than before. And obviously, we didn't just lose it over the course of a whole month. It all happened in one instant in time on the 20th, so we can actually extrapolate a little bit into that. But before we do that, let's look at this caption here. Citizen scientists may notice that the eruptive features and statistics provided here are mostly unchanged from the last reference map on September 13th, 2022. This is because a magmatic intrusion below Halemaʻumaʻu, September 20th, caused some lava to drain from below the crater floor. In the time since, lava has refilled to about the same level as before, and there have been no further oozes to expand the footprint of lava flows from this eruption. So that's the summary. That's why it looks so similar. And the previous map from September is this one right in here. 110.7, 29.2, same elevations there, same lava extent. And we actually have a version from the USGS, an updated version of cross-section across the crater showing how much it's filled compared to the pre-2018 collapse levels, compared to the water, compared to the first phase. This magenta color in the middle is how much we filled in here, right? So most of that inner pit, and once we get up onto this next down drop block, it's going to take a lot longer to fill that wider area, as we've discussed many times before here. However, what we could do is look at the volumes that we have now and just do some best guessing here, really. So the right end of this plot of volume is now showing us a little jog downwards, and this is how I've chosen to portray this. I did some math to try to figure this out as well. I'm going to explain to you if I can get it to zoom in enough. Here we are, right? So what we had is we had a volume back here at 103.9, and we had this 110.7, and we had established rate that was coming up of 2.9 cubic meters per second, right? And that's what we've been using to make our projections and all of that. So we know that, essentially what we do know is we have a point here, and we know we have a point just below it over here. And we know that this event was instantaneous on the 20th as well, right? So all I've done is I've just continued the same rate up until the 20th, and from the 20th, exactly the same rate to see how much drop we might have actually gotten, right? And it reveals an estimate of 112.2 million cubic meters of a peak of what we actually had, and then dropping back down 106.8. So that would allow us to estimate the intrusion, if this rate is anywhere near right, somewhere in that range of 5 to 6 million cubic meters is what actually caused an intrusion, or contributed from the lake towards the intrusion, right? Plus whatever came from underground as well. But that's the net loss, was at 6. So really we've come back up most of that 6 in the last 3 weeks, but that puts us back to just below where we were before, right? That's the long and short of the best we can do with that there. Now, as far as projections, that changes the projections as well. We set ourselves back, and I haven't got the labels on here, but down here at the bottom left, this is one. There was no lava; it was just water. It was back in here. The first eruption moved it this far. Second eruption moved it to right here, is where we are right now, by this red dot right in there. Right, that's our current elevation. Right here, 900 meters above sea level. That's a down drop block, so that would be projected to be reached by the end of this year, right? By the beginning of 2023 is when you would expect to have lava onto the down drop block, given the recent changes here, right? Assuming this rate that we really don't have a way to verify quite yet. After that, it's a long, long gap before the next threshold, right? This next value up in here, that's 1030 meters above sea level. That's the elevation of the previous lava level in Halemaʻumaʻu before 2018 collapse. So for it to reach that same level would take all the way until 2026 for that to happen. Right? For it to reach the actual caldera floor, That's up here around 1060. That would take till 2027. And for it to actually be able to reach that highest point on the caldera floor and spill out would be most of the way to 2029, right? Later 2028. And that's assuming an unchanged rate, which we obviously know now is not going to stay unchanged given what we just saw and just talked about with this projection we just saw back here, right? So the challenge really is, since we only have this point and this point, if we calculate a rate between these two, we're going to get a negative rate of, we essentially lost some lava. So we really can't calculate the rate across here. We need to wait until the next map version comes up to get the next rate to really make a better refined projection there and to better estimate how much of this lava actually drained into the intrusion and all those kind of things. So really this is the best guess for now based on the previous points. We just have the first point now. We need one more to get a trend that we can then work with a little bit better and improve our calculations here. So that is what we can do with the maps here. And I thought I would, that was where I was going to check for the volcano watch, which we come through already. So we'll move on here to the monitoring signals, which are brief. Let me get monitoring on our screen here. Browser will catch up. Hope. So here is our monitoring layout. Here is the lava depth for the last week. You can see there's variations up and down, almost like that kind of sloshing, pulsing, but really what you're looking for is this overall trend of up. It's still rising, right? It's come up in the last week about 1.5 meters. What's that? Maybe a little less than 5 feet or so. And it actually has mirrored the summit tilt, ground tilt, over the last week on the summit of the volcano as well. We're still having a few of these deflation-inflation cycles superimposed on this longer-term rising tilt as well, showing a magma coming into the volcano, into the shallow area, building up pressure in the ground, and actually swelling the whole structure still. So that's all going on. Here's the last month. So in the last month, we have a little bit of this noise still showing up here. It's throwing off our scale. So next week, our plot will look much prettier. But for now, we can still estimate we're somewhere around 375 meters prior to this collapse 3 weeks ago. Drop down about 10 meters and have to come back up about 5 meters, halfway back up to the previous level where we were before on a 1 month plot. And here is the tilt showing accumulation. We had lava come in and tilt the ground and stay there, and that's what this step upwards is. And really we're looking since then, we see lots of these little deflation inflation events all through here, but the pattern we're looking for is still generally rising tilt still coming up there, right? And just to kind of put this in a little perspective, pulled out from the presentation a few weeks ago as well, here is the tilt plot all the way back to the beginning of the eruption, showing how early on it actually was relieving pressure, bottomed out, but really since about March 2022 it has been a rising pattern, and here's a step up and then it kind of keeps rising from there. And there is the lake depth that we'll get back to here for the whole eruption, showing that little step down on that upper right side, just as we showed you guys as well. SO2, we haven't had a measurement come up in the last couple of weeks here, but since we are still catching up, the most recent value is back up at 1,800 tons of SO2 per day, in the higher end of the range, still normal, but still showing us this range of variability that we're used to seeing, right? And interesting because without this point, you might think, oh, everything looks looking kind of low, but there's some sampling missing as well, right? We don't have enough points to call that a real trend. There is a full depth from a year ago until now, and zooming in, the depth of the lava, there's just that little blip that looks similar to our accumulation rate we showed you guys earlier here as well. Okay, GPS at the summit, north to south across Kilauea caldera. You can see here is where we described what might have been somewhat of a blockage, right? Where magma was not reaching the surface. It was actually the summit was sagging a bit, and here it pops up, causes the intrusion, and we've resumed their previous trend. So north and south summit are spreading apart once again, still in exactly the same line as before, despite that little variation. So it got stuck, popped up, and it's back to on track essentially there, right? So still spreading, magma is still coming in, filling the summit reservoir of Kilauea underground, and coming up and filling the lava lake as well. Down on the East Rift Zone, Middle East Rift Zone at Pu'o'o. Here is north and south across that area. And I'm not showing you the left hand here, but really it's still that long contraction. The value is going down, or you're getting closer together as there's not magma coming into the rift there. Whatever just was happening, it's a sagging signal is what we're seeing there in the Middle East Rift, at least for now. So that is all the monitoring that we can share there. I think, what have I got here? Yeah, that's all the monitoring. Let's move on to looking at the gas. I showed you guys a plot for the last month, but I thought I would pull out here the whole last year so you can more easily see what I mean about this whole trend, right? If you look at it this way, you maybe can see a little bit more of upper level layer of this cloud, kind of, maybe it's been decreasing over time, right? And the bottom as well. So that's kind of an envelope that's including everything there. And maybe there is a little bit of a downward trend there, but you can see that range is still in 1,000, 2,000 tons per day now. You can see that it was up to 4,000 tons per day a few months ago. So that's the kind of pattern. Maybe it's going down a little bit, but that's the typical range that we've seen here. So 2,000 is still a lot. It's a lot enough to cause serious VOG issues, and so we won't discount that. Let's address the hazards here, the main hazard of this eruption. And remember, Kilauea is a volcano still erupting, Mauna Loa is not erupting. Kilauea is the one actually hazardous, and that is largely because of the volcanic gas coming out, producing the VOG. Here is our recent rate put in as 1,600 tons per day. Maybe we just don't have it updated on that other plot, but that's interesting to see, 1,600 tons per day. And given recent wind conditions, you see a lot of VOG in a volcano area, in a national park, occasionally swinging down to South Kona as well, and actually moving into the saddle region, and even as far as Hamakua at some points, right? There have been some weak winds. It's been muggy and humid, everyone on island knows, and the winds are not as strong, and people are talking about how bad the VOG has actually been around, right? So this little purple air here to document this as much as possible, and hope that this website likes us today. Come on. Loading. There's the island. All right, so we actually have monitors in Volcano showing any orange. You can see how they've been any orange much of today and other times in the recent week as well. I haven't pulled that up for you guys here, but that is the case. And other areas in the southwest still having effects. If I go down here to Pahala, you see that they also getting into the yellow as well. So leave it at that. The VOG issues are real, especially for those in the closer areas, typical downwind areas of the volcano. Within a national park, the park has its own air quality page here that anyone who wants to go and visit can check. So here is the summary. Maybe. Come on, summary. So summary is showing good, showing not much wind, it's showing a big blob for where the VOG might actually be collecting. If we go to the charts, you see that there's an art center showing SO2. And you see the art center station on there. That's nice. I don't remember seeing that one all the time. There's visitor center showing SO2 coming in this afternoon. So there are effects, steam vents, some SO2 coming in. There are effects coming through the park as well. You can obviously check the park signage and check with the park rangers for precautionary actions there. So that is almost all in Kilauea. The final thing, as usual, is just a quick touch on lava viewing. As you guys have gathered, lava is still circulating, it's still visible, it's still a good time for lava viewing. You don't get as many of the ooze-ups right now, but the lava lake itself is still fantastic. It's circulating, it's bubbling, it's spattering, the west vent spattering, that pond is overturning and glowing as well. And still the same few sites. From the north, Kilauea Overlook only sees that eastern portion of the crater floor. Not so good now because no ooze-ups to be seen. Rather, the best sites are Kupina Ipali, also known as Waldron Ledge, and the original OG site at Devastation Trail to Kanakakoi Overlook, where you get that closest view in, but similar view to what you see from a shorter walk at Kupina'ipali over here. So that is the viewing, and as an approximation, here's the last 3 weeks, day and night, from the B1 camera. Similar view as that Kanakakoi angle, showing what you might see. All these points of glow, the area in the far back where the lava lake is glowing and visible, so you need to bring binoculars or a telescope or a big camera lens to be able to see as well as possible back there. But you can see it's been consistent for all of that time. So I'll just highlight one submission that also is a catch-up one. Oh, it's going to make me load meta here. Not stay loaded, but I'm going to quickly show you one submitted to Hawaii Tracker Facebook group, image taken by a visitor. Let's see if I can get it to sidebar to. Oh, there it is. There's the moonbow over the lava lake. There, moonbow over the lava lake. From Angela Padilla on September 30th. Mahalo for sharing that. First time a moonbow and how beautiful over the lava. Just an iPhone picture here, so something that any of you guys catch on a cell phone, even if it's not an iPhone. All right, that's all the viewing report. I do want to wrap up Samoa. I know we're going super long today, but I'll keep putting it off. I want to just wrap this up and have it done with. Here's Ta'u Samoa summary. We have an updated map of the topography and bathymetry of Manua Islands, American Samoa. We have updated on our map where all the seismometers and GPS stations have been installed. Actually, I guess GPS is not shown on here, but a seismometer on here. And if we go to the USGS earthquake map and we search back for the period of time of September and zoom into American Samoa, lo and behold, there are earthquakes plotted on our map. So finally, it's all been caught up. See if I can get it to respond a little bit here. There it is. There's Ta'u Island right there. There's Ofu'olosega. And here's that area to the north that was described by the USGS. So we kind of circled thinking that's where the earthquakes would be, but there they are actually plotted. You see what is actually coming through. The largest one was a 4.5, the most recent one on the 5th. So over a month ago already now. And beyond that, you see 3.4, 3.4, 2.9, 2.9, 3.2, 3.8, 3.1. So really, you're only catching the really big ones. You're not catching anything that's really below. It looks like a two something on here on this entire list of what is about a little under 200 earthquakes back to the beginning of September there. And so that's where they are. Interesting to see the depths: 10 kilometers, 9 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 11 kilometers. There's that same depth that was described by the USGS as unchanging, that same kind of window, right? Interesting, because this is actually not too dissimilar to these events that have occurred in the past on Mauna Loa, right? You have earthquake swarm, they come in, they activate for a while. In this case, it was active for about a month. It kind of ramped up, ramped down, defined an area in 3D space, and then now it's over, right? And not to say Mauna Loa is going to do that, but we have seen Mauna Loa do that before. We'll see what it does this time, but interesting that we're coming across this similar pattern that's common on volcanoes all over the world here. And of course, we all want to know when it's going to actually erupt, but this is just part of the process, is going through these exercises of earthquake swarms and that they don't actually erupt ultimately. So that's the Ta'u distribution of earthquakes. There's another data source as well, which is an acoustic source that's being detected further across the Pacific on Wake Island, I believe. Let me get this page to load and confirm my memory. Nope, map. Yep, Wake Island's about 2,800 miles, 4,500 kilometers from Ta'u volcano. There it is across the globe, right? It's actually part of that, closer to the Hawaiian latitude than it is anywhere near Ta'u. But because they have this acoustic detector pointed in that direction, they've been able to detect seismicity from Wake Island and counted numbers of events per day that actually come through as a energy into their receiver there. So if I can get this to scroll down, there it is, earthquakes per day. You see here the end of July, beginning of August, and then actually here, I should have said August earlier, mostly through August, and then by the beginning of September, it kind of winds down there. And so you see it comes up, comes down. At most, they were at 60 per day, and you see the backfill of the whole catalog, both on a map and in this catalog here in this histogram. So you can see that distribution pattern. And now we're basically a month since we've had anything. It's basically all the way wound down, which is why we'd like to wrap this up. So that is a story on Ta'u. USGS volcanic notice search here. Let's see if I can step through this here. But essentially, on October 3rd, 10 days ago, USGS downgraded all the volcanoes in the area from yellow back down to green. Aviation code and an advisory level is normal for those volcanoes as well. So that also means that they have reverted back to monthly updates and no longer weekly or daily updates. So let's see, we gotta go back 30 days. And we'll go to Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, Who's Volcano, Ta'u Island. Let's look at those notices here. So the last monthly update was a week ago on October 6th. And no activity detected. Ta'u, no activity detected since it went down to normal green. And then we go back to October 3rd, and you see the change from normal to normal from advisory and to green from yellow here, noting that the swarm had essentially come to an end there. Right, both Ta'u and they actually have Ofuolosiga marked as well. So that pretty much wraps it up there for Samoa. All right, that's as fast as I can get through it without rushing. That's it. Done with that. We do have a little, I don't know, Dane, I do have some headlines if you want to go through any of those.
Yeah, I think it's worth doing that. I mean, when somebody needs to address the way the media has been covering it, you know,
Right.
I don't think it's just because we're long, it's worth skipping.
Yeah, we're not, yeah. Anyone who's with us this far is likely to stay another 5 minutes, I would suggest, huh? Let me see if I can get these to actually load on a screen here, and I haven't told you the order, so you're gonna come up. I'll just tell
fine.
you what's popping up here as soon as it allows me to. All right, so let's go back to our Mauna Loa label here, and let's transition. It looks like the first one up here on the screen is CNN travel.
Yeah, so let's see here. Yeah, this was one of the good ones. So there's a variety of different reporting that's going on, right? And everybody has their own staff writers and whatever putting it up. You will see a lot of articles just getting basically reposted by other news outlets, but CNN's title and reporting are not clickbaity, right? But we will get into some that are, we'll be able to hopefully show what is clickbaity.
Yeah, I'm trying to scroll to the image here. This is the image of the summit caldera Mokuaveoveo.
Right, and it has the correct picture as well. That's another big thing.
Yeah, I think I might have got these better ones at the beginning here. So here is the Washington Times.
And
portion
let's see here.
Mauna Loa for hiking shut down due to seismic activity. The image in the foreground is you can see the pit of Halemaʻumaʻu, not the bottom of it, but behind it in the background is Maunaloa.
Right, another good one. It shows the scope of the size of Mauna Loa. It's really hard to get a true photo of it. You can go to the caldera. You can take a standing far away one. This one happens to be looking over Kilauea, which is fine, but shutting down hiking trail, sure, true. Again, we'll hopefully get into some of the ones instead of showing the good reporting. Try and show what's actually steering people into panic, really, because there's plenty of that reporting.
Let's give credit where it's due here to start off, and then we can go rail on some other guys. USA Today, Mauna Loa summit closed until further notice due to heightened unrest.
Yep, another good one.
Yeah, Mauna Loa in the background again, similar. This one's a Kilauea foreground.
it's like, again, at least the people know what they're looking at and aren't overhyping the thing. That's a true statement. It is closed because of the heightened unrest. So again, credit there.
All right, next. Ooh, Star Advertiser. A couple of weeks of elevated seismic activity and ground swelling in a mountain suggest that Mauna Loa is about to blow.
Yeah, this is now we're getting, and this is the sad thing is like normally we expect the mainland news organizations to get it wrong, right? Because they don't have anybody out here, they don't know, and they just phone it in anyways, and then they throw a little hype on top to spice it up, get the clicks. But in this right now, with what we've shown, it's actually the inverse, right? We have the local Hawaii newspaper completely going out of their way to hype this thing up. About to blow. What are you talking about? About to blow. So again, it's like somebody just it's clickbaity, right? The good thing is I didn't find a lot of organizations in Hawaii that were doing this. The Star Advertiser seemed to be the only one out there throwing that kind of stuff out. And it doesn't, and you look at the title of the headline, it's like it's completely different. Mauna Loa showing potential to erupt once again. Yeah, that's reserved. Yeah, that's fine. And again, it's a picture of Mauna Loa. That's fine. It's just somebody went on Twitter and was like, hold my beer type of thing.
Yeah, so the Twitter poster is obviously not a stream watcher. Someone needs to point that person to our videos here. Maybe they don't have the 2.5 hours that we're going on here, and we'll have to put out a short video soon to catch that person up. All right, next. Discover is the world's largest volcano getting ready to erupt.
And Discover, we kind of have like a little bit of higher expectation because it's not written by just some journalist, it's written by somebody with a geology background, right?
Oh, yeah. Eric Clementi, famous eruptions blog. Yeah.
So it's a little bit higher standard, and it delivered too, right? He's got some photos that are interesting. He's got some breakdowns. It doesn't hype it up too much, Not everybody in that category, though, you can maybe say the same about, and maybe we have one of those to show as well.
Let's see. Next is phys.org. Mauna Loa summit closed until further notice due to heightened unrest. However, the photo does have Mauna Loa in it.
Right. It's just it's not even the central thing in that photo.
It's in the background, yeah.
It's way too much in the background on that one. It's like that's actually a photo of Kilauea Iki.
Right.
Yeah. It's not the worst, but again, you're physics.org and the bar is slightly higher than, whatever tabloid newspaper that you could select.
Yeah. Okay, MSN. Mauna Loa summit closed until further notice due to heightened unrest with a picture of a snowy Mauna Kea.
Yeah, again, the photos not the greatest, right? There's a few of them that are good, but guys are on the wrong mountains.
Yeah.
Like and USGS has plenty of footage publicly available that they could just go click on, download, and send. Right, easy, but never got that far. You're going to the observatories on Mauna Kea instead, which there will be views from Mauna Loa from Mauna Kea, but that's not what we're talking about right now.
I almost wonder if it went and grabbed some other video to stick in here as a little plug for some other content of theirs, and it doesn't necessarily go together. It's just like some algorithm here because it isn't quite
it could
time lapse of snow on Mauna Kea. It's just the only thing in common is it's in Hawaii, right? So
it might be algorithmic, actually. You're right. That kind of selection.
Forbes.
Yeah, this one was one of the more egregious ones to me. Just guys, that's Pu'uo'o. Like Forbes Science too. Like there's no checking on that. Just gonna put Pu'uo'o in there and call it Mauna Loa and the largest volcano in the world. It doesn't even look that big. In that picture, it's like tiny. You're thinking the largest volcano in the world, but yeah, the scale is hard to determine with these types of photographs. But when you know what you're actually looking at, it's like, guys, it's not even close. Like It wouldn't even rank in the top 5 if it was a volcano counted as its own volcano on the island. Like, what are you talking? What are you showing here?
Last one, Dr. Robin George Andrews. That's Quigley Volcano.
Right. So again, this is one of the more a guy knows what he's talking about, right? So a higher standard on him. Talking about effusive lava eruption on Mauna Loa. That's what it does. It's potential to be very dangerous. That's true. 2 places nearby. True. E.g. Hilo, not Hilo. Hilo would take weeks at the very minimum, months to even 1880 to 1881. I think that eruption was like over 250 days, something along those lines, and didn't get into the ocean in Hilo either. Right, it got to about where the University of Hawaii's campus is currently. So, yeah, not Hilo. Hawaii Ocean View, Milili'i, Kona Palisades. There, I'd be, that's what, when we talk Mauna Loa and what's concerning, it's those, right? And all the little areas in between. But it's in terms of the fast stuff, not Hilo.
Yeah, we described worst case scenario. Hilo is not it. It's that southwest quadrant of the volcano there, right?
Right. All right, yeah, and I think that might get us through all those. We just wanted to point some of these things out, and like 2018, we saw some crazy stuff as well. And thing about it is that stuff, it makes major impacts. I remember the meme. We don't have it queued, but there was a meme in 2018. What it was like, what people on the mainland think the eruption's like, and it's like half the island covered in lava, and then what it's actually like, and you can barely see it on the map, right? Because it's just the scale, and it gets lost in the media, basically.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thanks for going through that, and everybody that stuck around for this last little bit. We did have one good question here I want to ask from Dude. I hope you're still here, Dude. He says, what does Kilauea's summit expansion of 21 centimeters between the Uikahuna and Crater Rim stations, since about a week after the eruption began, while simultaneously infusing 29.2 billion gallons of lava or magma, what does that tell you about its status?
Let me make sure I understand the question. So you're talking about magma infusing into Mauna Loa and Kilauea at the same time? Is that what he's getting at?
Kilauea.
Okay, so
I think 21 is that 29.2 Mauna Loa, right? That's a Mauna Loa figure.
I'm not sure which figure that is at 29.2 within the last. Well, yeah, 29.2 billion gallons in the last in the 6 years from 2014 to 2020.
Right.
Yeah. So which is equivalent to how much was filled the summit crater of Kilauea, right? It's about the same amount. That kind of made a comparison of like what we had in the last year of Kilauea is what filled in those 6 years underground of Mauna Loa, just to give someone a visual idea of how much is filling in there, right? So that said, what's the question? Can we hit the question again? Let's see. Like summit expansion.
Summit expansion. All right. I think I asked kind of a similar question here. Maybe we. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I got it right. So he's talking about the very beginning of the eruption, right? So essentially, it's the fact that it's putting out lava, and the summit's still expanding, and the tilt's still rising, right? So what that's telling you about the status is that more magma is coming in than it can get out the top. So it's coming in and it's getting out the top, and it's filling in the underground reservoir as well. Both things are happening. So it's kind of swelling below, popping out to the top, and filling above all at once. That's how I take it.
Right. You're saying it's a Kilauea question now.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that would make sense. Yeah. All about Kilauea's, like what's Kilauea's status? Yeah. It basically shows that the magma supply is healthy, right? Healthy in the Kilauea and Mauna Loa both, right? Healthy enough that following a collapse, it refilled and it's just pumping up. It's putting out at the top, filling the lava lake, and filling the reservoir below at the same time, causing the ground to swell and expand all at the same time. But not enough that it's actually propagated outside the summit region. It hasn't gotten to the rift zones of Kilauea either, just like Mauna Loa. They're both kind of a similar status in that way, interestingly enough.
So it's just one of my questions. Seems like just from what we've been talking, the magma supply coming into both Mauna Loa and Kilauea is above historic trends, and not even just a little above, like probably well above. Is that the case?
I don't know that I'd say it's well above historic trends. I mean, the amount coming in has gone up significantly since 1950, right? That's the historic trend, right? So like
recent historic trend, yeah.
So I think it probably fits right in that same range. That's the modern normal, right? But it is high.
Okay.
But it is high compared to past. Absolutely, right. So if you look at Kilauea's, it is high. You know, there are times where it goes higher and lower and high. So it is a high time, generally speaking. Yes, that's true, but not
Right.
more so now than like last year or the year before that or year before that or anything like that. But yeah, for this whole era of our lives, for sure.
All right. Well, I think we got through the questions. Thanks everybody for joining us. We will be back Thursday at 5 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. Give us a few minutes to figure out tech difficulties sometimes, but hey, you know, we make it work. 5 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time, unless something happens, you know, we don't expect it to happen, but you never know. It could very well, and if it does, we will go live and try and bring you what we can right then. Check us out on Hawaii Tracker, hawaiitracker.com, and also the Facebook group. Post everything in there. And if you're not a member, you know, become a member and start sharing the information in there with us. Thanks everybody for joining us. You know, these long streams. I know this is what now going on 2.5 hours or over 2.5 hours. So yeah, appreciate everybody that's sticking with us, and we will be back.
Yeah, thanks, Dane. Yeah, thanks everyone for sticking with us. We'll cut it off here and we'll revisit what happens with Mauna Loa next week. We'll see if it stays steady, if it winds down, if it ramps up. The only one way to find out is to wait and see, as usual, right? Kilauea steady. Time to prepare Mauna Loa. One volcano is erupting and not really threatening. One is not erupting, but is on everyone's mind as a something to plan and prepare for. We've talked about the worst case and what's likely, so just leave you guys this one final map here that kind of summarizes this whole, what we talked about before, this pattern of southwest. The red is where the fastest, steepest, highest rates, steepest slopes. Kilo, weeks to months. Northwest, it's days to weeks there. So we can talk about this again. We've shown it before, we'll show it again, but kind of pulling it all together one last time here and wrapping it up for you guys. And yeah, all that said, one more.
Yeah, well, thanks Benjamin Fairhall with the $20 super chat, says keep up the good work, lads. And Susan L with an $20 super chat says thank you for Samoa. Appreciate you guys. Until next week.
Mahalo, you guys. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but at this point, you'll just have to wait again.
All right.
So until next week, you guys, see you on Tuesday with 2 pineapples after dark in the park, streaming that event, and then back on Thursday with our regular live and catching up on what's going on. So until then, mahalo everyone. Thanks to hawaiitracker.com. And for hawaiitracker.com, he's Dane DuPont. I'm Philip Ong.